swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend
that I will support and defend
the Constitution of the United States.
the Constitution of the United States.
So what was it like? What was that mental transition like for you going from Evan the high schooler to a military academy to the military, and then like now you have to be an adult outside of the military? What was that? Was it as easy for you from an identity perspective as it was from just like a life perspective? What?
Yeah.
Talk me through that.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely say every next step seemed to get a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, all of a sudden a little more responsibility, right? As you well know, academy to then getting out, all of a sudden, man, hey, you're paid well, you got a little more flexibility, you're leading folks, and then getting out, it's running the company. You do got full flexibility of things. But so that was all I really enjoyed, getting those progressive, like I should say, increases in responsibility, etc. But that's where, like, for my life, just going, it was, I've always seen things, I would say things have constantly always gotten better. But then things hit real hard in 2020. It's kind of started a hair earlier, I'd say 2019. One of our businesses got walloped by basic command-related decision deal that happened. And that was tough, but it caused me to plow into another business. It worked out really well. But it was one of those deals where, hey, we had to deal with that struggle. And then a family member, one of my sisters, ended up getting terminal cancer. So like that kind of stuff starts hitting you. And that's when the move back for home started. And so for me, like what we talked about before for being on here, my transition out, things went relatively well in a lot of different ways. But then when it really hit was the two and a half years later. And then all of a sudden it was, wow, where am I really at? I'm spending so much time focused on us building what we had there for Ohio. But then back home, my family's very close with my family. I love my family. And when like that happened with my sister at the time, it was like, my wife looked at me and she was like, it's time to go. And then that caused a lot of stress and struggle between our businesses and what we had. And it just made you realize, wow, when you make that transition and it's pretty abrupt, it was tough. And that's when all of a sudden I was pulled away from the military community that I had there in Ohio, even after getting out, because it's still just such a military heavy place, to Wichita, where there's a lot less military influence. We have McConnell. I was literally last night, just brought in as an honorary wing commander with actually a 070 Suffolk guy, really cool dude. So I'm excited for that, to get a serve a wing. And ironically, I think I'll have a more Air Force experience than I probably did at Wright Pat, which is where it's like the inverse, right? It was me and a few military and like 80 civilians. And here it's 80 military and a few civilians. So it's cool. But that was probably the hardest thing. And that's what brought us together talking about it. Like where it hit me hard, that transition, was actually as we left Ohio, even a couple years after getting out of the military. And then it was a big, man, who am I? Classic John quote from, Les Mis or whatnot. Who am I? And that was tough. I knew we came back for the right decisions, but then it was a complete restart. Like, it was a complete restart. Brokerage, everything done. We still got the rentals and stuff done. We were able to bring WeVet with us for a bit, but it was a time, man. So 2020, as we say, one of the heaviest years. And that's where I really started to realize I missed that military connection and started working to get that back.
That's really interesting.
Like I say, ride up and then whop, and then back.
Interesting. I mean, that's so cool. I mean, it's just a fascinating story, because so many people are like, you think, oh, right after I get out, that's when I'm going to have if I'm going to have problems, that's where I'm going to find them. And then you find out later that's not the case. And so for you, how did you, when you started, you moved back, and how did you start realizing that you were going through something? And what did you then do to start, I guess, moving in a positive direction?
Great question. Well, number one, something was wrong, because I was actually getting in really good shape for a bit there. I was like, yeah, it's working out a lot. Because at that time, right when we had moved back to Kansas, it was, I took pretty much 7 months off, and it was, company was running fine that we had. I had let everything else go in Ohio. It was a quick, abrupt deal. And I took about 7 months off, spent it with my family, as much time as I could with with Emily and everything that I could for it. And that was it, 7 months. And I got in shape. But then I realized, man, guy just can't quit working at this time. So I knew I had to get moving again. But in the moment for us, I go to church. Well, pastor had a really good line of how in our minds we drive grooves and our minds are very careful. All before we moved back to Kansas, I didn't realize how fragile our minds can really be. And so all of a sudden I had such a quick, abrupt change there over a few month period coming back, and then just the time off, the time with family, the losses, there were a few close losses, which was really tough that year. And all of a sudden my mind, the negativity could just run its own paths. And before I knew it, my mind was looping on things that were negative and not how I've always been in my life, which is pretty much positive things. That was a tough one. And so it literally, it's been a long time to work to get that out. And it's not really until the last year that's changed quite a bit. I had another son, it's grown, time heals some things, but working on making sure that you train your mind to get back to running and, like I say, the right grooves, because we can get stuck looping on things. So that was really my struggle. I'd say it took a good year to year and a half, and there's still times where your mind can revert back to things and you got to get it back on track.
I think that's great advice. And I think that the fact that you can, like, that understanding that it does take time. I think that one of the things that I hear a lot from people who get out of the military is like, people want to have like the 95-yard touchdown pass of like mental health, like recoveries versus, and no one wants to do 3 yards in a cloud of dust, like advancement through these kinds of battles, but that's generally what's required. And I think that for a lot of people, that's that concept is hard to grasp, because no one wants to just sit and be like, I'm sad. And like I didn't feel as sad today, and viewing that as a win versus just being like, I'm sad forever. I think that's a tough pill for people to swallow, but it's cool that you talk about it, because I think that's it's such an important concept to grasp when we talk about moving on from difficult events or things that have like hurt us in the past.
No, that's spot on. That's
Mhm.
spot on. It took getting to a point for it that, hey, my family members I lost, they're not coming back. One of my good best friends died, not coming back. And it's like, all right, that's past, and I'm beating myself up for not moving forward right.
Mhm.
And it's just making sure that then you get to a point where you got to either realize, and I think this is a break point where folks either just end up kind of in misery in that negative constant track, where you realize no one outside is really going to change it for you. You just got to get up and you got to start thinking as positive as you can. There's always going to be negative that still comes around, but you got to try to grasp control of that as best you can and change it. And for me, lean heavily on faith, my wife, for that kind of stuff. Makes a big impact, but find something that you can help change that back to being positive. And now, fortunately, I'm finding myself back in the old routine where the ruts I run are pretty consistently positive versus negative. So every now and then you hop back off that track, but something that's important, man. And it's real.
Yeah,
Very
two
real.
things that you said that I really love. The first one, I think it's really funny. Once you're out of it, it sounds ridiculous. And if someone who's listening to this have never heard it, it might sound ridiculous, but it's so true. Like, getting mad at yourself for not being better faster is such a like when you're outside of that, it sounds like a ridiculous concept, but when you're in it, it's so true, where you're just like, why didn't I get this right? And then you get mad at yourself. It's like this like crazy self-licking ice cream cone of like anger, and then you're sad, and then you get angry because you're sad, and then that makes you more like, and it's a tough place to be.
All of a sudden running it constantly.
Exactly.
Get your mind out of that groove. Wagon wheels. Picture those wagon wheels running over a trail, and then ultimately, where wagon wheels end up riding 3-4 inches in the ground, and they can't deviate. The problem with our minds, we can keep running those tracks so much. And the question is, like, I know I had to get to a point where I asked myself, just as a man, it was, hey, when things are really good, you're positive and about yourself. But the question is, who are you when it does get tougher and it's rough? And so, like, the one thing that I work on for it now is I want to be a good man, a good father, a good person, a good believer, everything, all that together while I am in a rough situation. So that ideally, when I'm in a good situation, I know that I'm not just happy and positive because things are going well, but it's because that's who I am as a person, right? And I heard that kind of pitch at some point somewhere, and I was like, good Lord, that is exactly, I got to figure this out. Got to work through this, right? So that's where that rut, that mindset, who am I again? Like, what am I really going to be? And that's what I drive at. Is it every day, right? Heck no. Half the time, still
Not
the
at all.
darn dragon's hopping on the wrong rut that you
Uh-huh.
get, but it's getting better and better. And you know what? Even if we're not doing better with whatever we're working on at that moment, that's
Mhm.
okay, because I know I'm still the person that I
Yeah.
want to need to be.
Yeah, and I think that the other piece that you brought up there that I think is really powerful and that I really want people to key in on is the grounding your identity in things that are much more consistent versus things that are inconsistent. Like,
Mm.
if you ground your identity in a singular item, or your mental health improvement, or your business, or whatever, like, those are things that they're not in your control really at all. And so if people attach their identity to things that are not only out of their control but have high fluctuation day in and day out, it's going to affect how you view yourself as a person. But if
Yeah.
you choose to ground your identity in things like, um, I'm also a Christian, so in my mind, it's like, if I'm a Christ follower first, then I'm a good husband, like, then I'm someone who's loved by my family. Like, those two things, if those are my foundation, those don't change. Like,
Mhm.
Christ doesn't change. Wife probably she's gonna be the same for a really long time. Like, but those
Big.
are yeah, hopefully, cross your fingers. But those are things that persist through chapters of life, and those will give you consistency where other items don't, including
Yeah.
the military or
Yeah.
your other job. Like, those end at some point. And so I love that you talk about, I'm a happy, positive guy regardless of what's happening to me today. I think is such a powerful thing to say, and I really love that that's what you're bringing up. So,
One of the things that I see the most that folks getting out and to go on their own is not always taking into account maybe the realistic picture of the financial piece of business and what it takes. And this is the product, service, whatever I'm trying to do, is it really viable or not? So that sounds like the cold, hard Scrooge answer to it, but spend time really working on that. I know the few folks right now who just decided, hey, I'm going to get out, I'm done, and I'm going to start building like whatever the podcast, a couple of them are like news related things. I'm like, great, but what's the plan? Are you thinking, do you have, how long of runway do you have? How much have you saved up to make that work? What's the game plan for getting it to work and monetize well enough to support you? Just thinking that through from a business perspective. And you want to have a good, not necessarily full business plan, but essentially plan in your mind of how you can see it being economically feasible. One of the biggest issues that I just have with guys getting out and doing the rough analysis of, is it smart to get out or not, is just miscalculating the needed income that they have for getting out. So if you're in the Air Force and you're mid-range officer or enlisted in your sergeant level and stuff, it feels like you might be making very little while you're in, but sometimes we don't account for. And on the numbers, like your tax returns, you're like, man, Evan, I'm only making $30,000. And I'm like, how do you think we're approving you for like a stupid high house? It's because you have non-taxable incomes, you don't pay insurance, all that kind of stuff. So you got to want to really account for all that, because it's usually a lot more than what you think. And going through those steps, working with a lot of people, I see, hey, you might think I only need 100,000 or I need 60,000 when I'm getting out. Really, it might need to be a little higher. So if you're a business and you're trying to start your business, make sure that you have the economics there that can make that work, and prepare for yourself. Save up. If you're married, boy, make sure you and your wife or your husband are on that same page. That is critical. The person that you're with is the most important thing. I'm just so fortunate. My wife, she's half the reason we have what we got. She's made those things work and run, right? She's the brains behind it all, making it look just wonderful for the marketing and everything. You want to make sure you're on the same page for that. Because if you're not, that could be setting yourself up for a harsh reality, especially when you combine miscalculating economics and miscalculating your house and how that relationship works. That could be real tough.
Yeah.
So having those
Might have a
conversations.
bad time. Yeah. Yeah.
I've seen it. And I only say it because I've seen it. And what's wonderful about the business we have now is I get to work for a lot of folks that are making that transition. And we just talk about what that looks like. What could that mean for you? Right. And like those basics that we hinted at there earlier, the big ones of the pay changes. Hey, Evan, man, I'm getting out. I got this job, cool tech job. Oh, wonderful. What's it paying? Oh, it's paying me hundreds of thousands a year. And then we're like, great, that's awesome. But let's go through it. Well, half of that stock options. How does that really impact your ability to buy that house you want? So we got to go over those things. So you just want to start thinking that through, fleshing it out. And so I'd always say good business planning. If you want to go buy a home or invest, you want to talk with a lender to see how is this change me getting out going to affect me. You want to work with real estate professionals, financial advisors to know, hey, what would my picture look like getting out? And I think a lot of folks just don't do that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that when people get out of the military, we tend to hyper focus on a very small number of items, like getting your VA paperwork done, which I don't even think a lot of people really focus on that.
No.
Yeah. A lot of people are just like, job, right?
And
Resume, get job.
You assume that I'll have time once I'm out because it'll be less busy. That's probably one of the biggest like pointers for when getting out. Get that taken care of. And if it's ever any bonus to it, so many folks tell me, well, I can't get it done beforehand. Like I can't, or there's no benefit. Well, if you're going to be buying a home getting out, you can actually get your VA funding fee waived if you file your claim before getting out. It's huge. A lot of folks assume they just can't do it, or they got to try to ask for some refund once they're out and it doesn't work, or plenty of lenders tell them you just can't do it till you're out. Not the case. You can get it waived before getting out. You just got to file that claim enough time, work with someone who gets it. We can file the paperwork to get it waived. That helps guys save a lot on their next home. So yeah, little things like that. Those are things that I think are missed quite a bit. Great question. So that kind of leads into really, hey, those decisions, how do we really help folks through that? So one of the major things that we have is we say it's our timing recommendation. So you want to ask yourself two questions. Number one, will I own this home as a rental for the long run? So if you plan on PCS into an area and you're like, hey, I want to be a landlord, I want to invest in this, I'm going to hold this for a long time. And maybe I'm going to rent it out because I know I'm coming back, I want to live in it again. All right. That's great. If you're going to plan on being there and keeping it for the long run, usually consider renting. You'll watch my buy versus rent videos and stuff we put out. We don't say buy, we say consider, because there's other things you need to take into account. But most likely it's a good decision to buy. But if you're like, hey, I don't want to have that as a rental long term, which I know in reality, working with hundreds, now over 1,000 military families, like that's not the majority of people. You ask yourself, number two, am I going to be there at least 3 years? Very simple. Am I going to be there at least 3 years? If you're going to be there less than 3 years, this is where it's like, oh no, the lender's actually telling me to rent. Yeah, I'm telling you to consider renting. Like it might be better to actually rent the darn place. This is where we're a little unique. Most folks, if you're working with a lender, agent in a specific city, it's binary. You're either buying or you're not buying. For us, I like to say, okay, I want to sound altruistic and say we want the best decision for you. But our incentives are relatively aligned. Why? Because if we mess up this PCS and you get crammed into a place that's not optimal for buying, then we just lost your next 3 PCSs. We have folks now with us on their 4th PCS that we're working for. So we don't want to mess that chain up. So there's times where we recognize, hey, maybe don't buy because it might not set you up for the next time. that you're going forward. So that timing recommendation, the heavy deal there is at least 3 years. And the reason why it's 3 years is because that's that break even point where if you purchase a home and you put little or no money into it, ideally with a little appreciation, not a lot. The last 3 years, man, it's been nuts, right? It's covered up so many people's mistakes. It's not even funny. But remember, when I started, that was not that way. 3 years, things are relatively flat or a slight increase. But 3 years is kind of where you start to cover your costs. And that ideally, if you have to sell, you ideally are going to be at least break even. But ideally, you're even longer than that. So that's why I say 3 is the minimum. Ideally, 4, 5, 7 years that you're going to have there. But 3 is that magic number where it starts to make a little bit more sense buying versus renting. To leave someone with, that's like, especially for transitioning out. Man, I know mine, especially for this type of talk. Then the real thing is, for if you're getting out, the one thing I should leave away with is how delicate your mind can really be. And while we're in, maybe, and especially in the military, you get it fortified pretty darn well. You have a routine, you have a lot of consistency, but know that mind can be really delicate, especially if you're praised throughout all that time. I was good. I got the firewall 5s. I got the top OPRs, EPRs, all that good stuff consistently. Be ready. Your mind's extremely delicate, and you want to treat it that way. I wish I could go back and tell myself that and stress it. Hey, your mind, it's running right now. Those wagon wheels have been really good and your ruts are deep, but be ready for when it gets to be a struggle. And you got to ask yourself, hey, what is it that really makes me me? And so just know your mind's extremely delicate. Take care of it. That's the one biggest piece of advice I'd give.
I think that's great. I think it's great advice. I'm going to actually, one more question that I want to ask you based off what you just said. Do you think if I could send you back in a time machine to see the Evan of yesteryear, what do you think you could have told yourself to actually believe what you're saying right now?
What could I have told myself to believe?
Do you think you could have actually convinced yourself?
Those twins ones. Could I have convinced myself? Holy cow, dude, that's a good question. What? How would I convince younger me to do it other than like smacking myself or something like that? Like, dude, trust me, this is it. Oh man. Oh God.
You can also say you don't think you could, because I don't know if I could have, honestly.
The real question in that is that the whole point of it? Like, would you know? Like, a part of the journey is that you're figuring that out. Would I get it? Would I just go, oh yeah, man? And that's what I could have said. If you would have told me that when I was young, I'd be like, okay, yeah, of course. I know it's good. But I might say the question that I never quite asked myself. I think the question could potentially be, the question for that would probably be, Evan, do you think, I would ask myself, do you think things are going really well right now because of circumstances that you have control over or don't have control over? Do you think you're doing really well because that's you as a person, or because that's how things have been going for you? If things are bad, do you think you will still have the same outlook? That's why I wish I could ask myself that. And that's what hit me relatively hard when I started getting into the hard slumps, the losses, everything in early 2020. That's when it really was just looking at myself going, whoa, am I me because things go well? Or am I me because I know what I'm doing and I can control my life? That would have helped.
Good.
Probably a coin flip if I would have listened to myself, but
that's a good question though.
That could help.
That's powerful, man. I love that. That's a really good question to end on. I think that everyone can take that and ponder over that quite a bit.
That's like Marty McFly in the Back to the Future or whatever, and all those shows where you gotta like, how do I know it's you? How do I know the part? Dude, that was a killer question that I'm going to be thinking more on. How would you convince yourself? How would you?
Because like if you ever came
doing something stupid when you were young,
yeah,
tough one.
Yeah, exactly. Because if we ever came up with the answer for that question, like I think you cracked the code. Like, oh, I can just make somebody believe me immediately. Like, if you literally have the silver bullet where you can just be like, "Pachow," and they're like, "Oh my God, I'm a changed human." Like, that's the greatest piece of psychological information ever. Like, quit real estate, sell that. like that's the. But
Exactly.
we're,
Hey, I love young me. Actually, one of the things I do ask myself when you're hard on yourself now, I look back at young me, and I know that young me would actually be really pleased and proud with where I'm at. And then it hits me of, why can't I be proud of where I'm at now, though? I know younger me. I mean, I write goals, and I look back at some of those, and I'm like, I've blown past those when I was young. Like, I thought it was a high bar to make X or get this and build this and have that. And I'm like, now I'm like, holy crap, like we exceeded that well in advance. Why am I still thinking more? And it's just because I think that's like a human nature. That's what we have. So I think it's an important one. One of the great things I should say always at the end, for its sake, like just trying to, getting out, going back to the delicate part of the mind, is really that, like, I've come to really believe, like, for a man, you are what you think about. And man or woman, I should say, but as people, we're just getting out. You are what you constantly think about. So be careful what you're thinking about. That goes back to that delicate mind piece. And so if you're starting to think negatively, it's what you start to become. If you start to tell yourself that you can never get in shape, if you start to tell yourself you can't quite figure it out financially or for family or your kids, then it starts to happen. I just think the most powerful thing really is what's right up here in our control over our minds and how we handle that. Something that I just never fully appreciated until the last couple of years.
Hey, everybody. I really hope that you liked this Supercut of the Post-Military Podcast. If you did and you want to see more, I would recommend that you check out the whole episode, which is here on YouTube and also on multiple different podcasting platforms. If you like this and you want to support the channel, I would ask that you give the video a like, subscribe, and share the content with those who might need to hear it. Thanks so much, guys, and we'll see you in the next episode. Peace.